was a big significance put on their military. And then the military moved to outlaw the Communist Party and the trade unions, and then they censored the press. So, this infiltrating ideology of Marxist communist government, this, as Reza's westernizing his nation, he's purging out communist ideology, which is, indication of Britain and U.S.'s influence because they were doing the same thing at the time. For political support, the state looked to landowner classes, and for the first time in history, an Iranian state won complete control over the country as a whole by breaking the power of tribal communities. So at this time, land was owned by basically the elite class, and then it was worked by peasants. So they, essentially the elite did not even live on the land. It was basically sourced out to the poor to work it at, next to nothing rates. I also wanted to bring up too, there's some lessons to learn from Iran's history because there's certain aspects that the U.S. is seemingly going down the same path. So up until 1928, the ulama had control over judicial system. So I mentioned the Sharia law, so they implemented Sharia law. But in 1928, Reza Shah introduced a new law codes which replaced Sharia law. So it was purely a secular judicial system now. So in 1936, a new law was passed that required every judge to hold a degree from the Tehran Faculty of Law or a foreign university, making it impossible for the ulama to sit in courts of law. So that was their strategy to push out the ulama from government, from the judicial system. So now Iran's ruled by a secular code of law instead of Sharia law. So that was 1936. So also in the late 20s and 30s, the state-controlled economy was further modernized by establishing new custom offices. So customs would basically manage the flow of goods and services throughout, in and out of the nation, in and out of the country. So these customs offices were staffed by Belgian officials, and then tax collecting and banks were financed and organized by America and Germany at the time. In 1927, an Iranian national bank was founded under the management of German financial experts. So you got to ask yourself, why does the West have such a interest in Iran? Are we that concerned about Iran's welfare that we're offering up our services like this? There's got to be an alternate, a motivation.
We want their oil.
Yeah. All right. So by the 1930s, Britain controlled the production. Is that on the previous slide? Yeah. So by the 1930s, Britain controlled the production of oil. Russian share of Iranian exports fell from 34% to 1%, and the German share rose from 20% to 42%. The state controlled approximately 33 to 40% of Iranian imports and exports. So the oil that's being pulled out of Iran is primarily owned by private businesses out of Britain. Also, another motivating factor isn't just the oil, but to remove the influence of and relationship between Russia and Iran. Because remember, here shortly, the Cold War is going to be kicking off.
Actually, we saw go through World War II first.
Say, we got another war going.
Right.
So you said that that the oil production the sales was dropping going to Russia, but increasing
Yeah.
going to Germany.
Germany, yep.
Okay.
Well, yeah, let me rephrase that. Not the Cold War, but the concern for communism's, the spread of communism. That's what I meant, sorry.
We'll just give it to the National Socialists instead.
What side was Iran on World War II?
World War II?
Yeah.
We'll get there.
They were
We'll get there.
allies with the Germans, weren't they?
Yep. For a part of it. We'll get there. All right, so a side note, oil was first found in Iran in 1908, and then in 1909, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company was established. So they were founded to exploit the discovery. So that's what APOC is the acronym for that. So in 1914, the British government acquired a controlling interest of APOC, 51%. Oil production was profitable for Iran, but was a source of bitter resentment against foreign companies for their manipulation of royalties and the absence of Iranians in the managerial and administrative positions. So this is kind of the foreshadowing of what's to come in Iran. So kind of this oil industry is kind of the root to the resentment that starts springing up against Western society. So from this point, from the point of discovering oil up to World War II, Iran entered a phase of development that consisted of small modern sectors in an otherwise backward economy and society. So manufacturing was concentrated in cities and benefited only a small portion of the population. So again, it's dedicated to the elite classes. Agriculture remained unproductive. State centralized economic modernization and a new education system helped to create an elite class of army officers, bureaucrats, merchants, contractors, doctors, lawyers, engineers, teachers, and writers. So this elite class adopted Western values and a Western style of life. So they dominated over an unproductive and impoverished peasant population. So another reason why communism or Marxism was such a popular idea, especially for, the peasants, because, they're the slogan for, communism and Marxism is, they're basically supporters of the downtrodden and the working class. During World War II, concern that supply routes across Iran to Russia would be shut down and ensure a continual supply of oil, Britain and Russia seized control of Iran. So here we have, first you have, an effort to remove a relationship between Iran and Russia to the World War II kicking off, and now they're moving to reestablish a relationship between both Britain, Russia, and Iran. So they forced Reza Shah to resign and made his minor son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, basically an essential vassal leader. So further influence from outside forces. And then between 1941 and 1953, Iran passed through a period of political struggle. So in the late 40s, the United States, on the edge of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, eager to create a Middle Eastern barrier against possible Soviet expansion, emerged as the principal patron of the post-war Iranian regime. So in enters the U.S. into the scene. So they start heavily supporting Iran. So the U.S. advised the Iranian government on economic management and organized Iran's police and military forces and supplied it with military aid. So, Imi, to answer your question, during World War II, Iran was sided with Russia and Britain. Yep. Then as Cold War kicks off, the U.S. steps in and starts, managing Iran, getting involved. Then in 1951, Mohammad Mossadegh was elected as prime minister, the leader of the National Front. So he was basically a pro-democratic leader who was supported by a coalition of landowners, tribal leaders, leftist intelligentsia, and ulama. He pushed through Parliament a bill to nationalize the so APOC, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, he pushed to have it nationalized, which means basically removing Britain as the privatized owner of, the majority and having it owned by the state of Iran. So at that point, it became known as the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. So that was in 1951. So this, obviously, that would cause some scuffle with Britain and the U.S., so a bitter 3-year struggle followed in which the United States refused to support Iran. The Western powers boycotted Iranian oil, and the Iranian economy collapsed, and the Mossadegh coalition broke up. So here Iran gets major control of its own oil, and the majority of Western nations refuse to trade or utilize it. So their economy collapses.
Can't let a country be in control of its own resources.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. So we helped them.
We helped them build their economy based on their oil, and then they decided they wanted the
control our own state. We want to
Yeah.
be like you guys. We just want to control our stuff. We're like, nope, not happening. Stupid. Every country does that to each. Like we're all guilty of
yeah.
this history for you.
Who do you think put the Ukrainian government in power? U.S. Vice President Biden under Obama. Yep. The current, that's why Russia's doing what they're doing.
Russia does what they do because of Russia.
We've done that to almost every nation, third world nation in the world.
I still don't like Putin.
No. He can be bad, and yeah.
Yeah, no,
Two things can be true at the same time.
exactly.
All you gotta do is say it's XKJV.
Yeah, there you go.
That's all you need to know.
So the Western powers boycotted Iranian oil, and the Iranian economy collapsed, and the Mossadegh coalition broke up. And then in the ensuing struggle for power, the CIA helped the army, the Iranian army, which they called the Operation Ajax, by bribing soldiers, mobsters, and journalists to destabilize the country and help the new pro-Western Prime Minister Fazlullah Zahidi and Mohammad Reza Shah to seize power, dismiss Mossadegh, and reestablish an authoritarian regime. So they basically overthrew a pro-democratic leader for a authoritarian leader with the support of the U.S. So oil began flowing again, and the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company changed its names to British Petroleum in 1954. Thus, the foreign companies avoided nationalization, and they maintained control of oil pricing and marketing. The Shah ruled once again with virtually absolute powers, controlling the army and establishing the Savak. So the Savak was basically their KGB, their military secret police. They were some ruthless bastards. I saw some images of some of their torturing that they did. Was pretty nasty. A small elite of officers, administrators, landowners, and some wealthy merchants and religious leaders dominated Iranian politics. So again, once again, Iran is controlled by the elite classes.
Yeah, this is the Cold War. This is the West and East fighting through another country. That's all it is.
Yep. Yep. So there were some good things that came out of it. The Shah's regime was closely allied with the United States and was dependent upon American assistance. They joined the Central Treaty Organization, which was basically a defensive organization for promoting shared political, military, and economic goals. And this was between Turkey, Iraq, Great Britain, Pakistan, and Iran. Iran's relationship with the United States and Great Britain strengthened its relations with Israel. So it began establishing a good relationship with Israel. And it helped the U.S. prevent Iran from establishing a good relationship with the Soviet Union. And then between 1960 and 1977, the government undertook some reforms. And this reform was deemed the White Revolution by the more extremist Iranians. So this reform included land reform and the extension of voting rights to women and their employment in government offices. So prior to the reformation of land ownership, the ownership of land, like I mentioned, was concentrated in the hands of a small number of rich families, and they were mainly absentee landlords, where they would have the land worked by peasants. The Reformation forced landowners to sell the excess land to these peasants. So it opened up access for land ownership to peasants. Problem was, let's say you're working for a machine shop, and a big corporation or union, and government says, no, you can't monopolize the industry. So give it to your machinists. Well, how are they going to do their job with no equipment? They're poor. So here they are with land, but they don't have the technology or distribution means to be successful. So it forces them to leave the land, and millions of people migrate to the cities. So then this formed a huge mass of unemployed people in the cities. And then by the late 1970s, Iran was importing most of its food. So it couldn't support its own agricultural industry. So in response, the state created large-scale this should sound familiar with what's happening in the U.S. The state created large-scale state-sponsored farm corporations, which required the peasants that were able to continue farming to pool their lands together and take shares in the larger enterprise, creating capital-intensive mechanized farming corporations. And as you can imagine, the same thing happened to pasteurizing. So instead of having traditional livestock facilities or pasteurizing, they moved to a mechanized meat and dairy farm setup. So similar to like what you see in some of the more corporate-led cattle facilities. By the way, if you haven't read some of the things that Bill Gates is doing with farmland, I would recommend you read it.
He's gotten in agriculture now?
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I know he's big in education and vaccination.
So during this Reformation, women in small numbers began to enter into teaching, nursing, and factory work. So in 1936, wearing of the veil was forbidden, and women of the urban upper and middle classes began to adopt modern dress. And then in 1967 and 1975, family protection laws were put in place that required divorce to be reviewed in courts and wives' consent to polygamous marriages. So prior to this, if a male divorced, or if a man divorced his wife, the woman was no longer, or was not allowed to remarry, but the man was, and the man was given sole custody of children, no matter what. And he was, the husband was allowed to enter into a polygamous marriage, regardless of what the wife thought. So, out of the family protection laws, this was reversed. So that's one good, another good thing that came out of the influence of the U.S. You can see in the background here, this is a picture in the early 1970s of the women, Iranian women. A lot different than what you would see today. Let's see, do I have enough time to finish? I don't. I'll stop there. I'll continue on next weekend. Yeah, so this, this same influence of the West, and as we get next weekend, we'll start to see the attitude, the revolting against the West, and the thought process of Muslims towards the West starts to change. Terms like infidel, the Western dragon, those type of terms start seeping in. So those same instances happen with the same nations I mentioned that were part of the defense treaty that was established with Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq. So, all right, that's all I got. Thanks.